Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 339 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is setting goals. Our quote of the day comes to us from Og Mandino. The victory of success is half won when one gains the habit of setting and achieving goals. Please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a 5-star review so we can positively impact even more people. I really enjoyed connecting with our guest today. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be on Jeff Heggie's podcast, and it's an honor to have him return the favor. I know that you will enjoy today's episode. Jeff, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
I had the opportunity and the privilege of being on your show a couple weeks ago, so I am honored and privileged that you are returning the favor today.
You bet. I'm excited. It was a great episode, and anytime we've had conversations, it's been awesome. So I'm still getting over the fact, trying to realize if you are related to Winston Churchill or not.
I'm gonna leave that up to you. He's a great uncle, cousin, first predecessor on my mom's dad's side. So it's a really complex, but you have to follow the family tree very well. For those of you that don't know what Jeff and I are talking about, we had a fun conversation where I tried to convince Jeff on his podcast that I was related to Winston Churchill. So that is the meandering of our nutty beginning to this podcast. But as you know, Jeff, first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
The theme of our podcast, same title, is No Quit Living. And I wanted to ask if you yourself have either a no quit story or perhaps a really challenging time personally or professionally where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
You know what? This is a question that you've asked me before, and it's a tough question because there's been a lot of times that I think back to that. And there's been times that I would say, yes, I've had situations where I haven't quit and didn't give up. And maybe I should have. But when I think back to some of the things, when I look at a situation where I really could have given up and I never did, I look at what I'm doing now, look at my coaching. And it was a slow get-go. And I was fortunate enough when I started that I had another company. So I had some other sources of income. But as I wrapped up that company and things started getting a lot rougher, it was, okay, what am I doing? How am I going to support my family? And how are we going to live type thing? But I knew the things that I had created, what I had to offer had a lot of value in it. And so I took, obviously with consultation with my wife, took the route that, this is going to work. We're going to figure this out. And, it might be rough for a little while. And it was, but it really turned into something where I was able to start building it and doing something that I love to do and helping people to grow and get better. So it was really good.
I appreciate you touching on that. And, you referenced a slow get-go, and I think it's a side topic and something that you and I have spoken about in the past, not only, I believe, on your show, but also in some of our one-on-one conversations. We have this ability to look at others, and especially with social media, we are viewing their highlight reel, and we're looking at somebody that's been coaching or speaking or podcasting for many, many months, if not multiple years before us. And for some reason, our mind doesn't really decipher that, okay, I'm looking at Jeff, and Jeff's been doing this for 6 years, and I've been doing this for 6 minutes. So should I really compare myself to Jeff. Now, I want to preface that as I think it's very important to look up to other people because, as we both know, success leaves clues. But it's never a good thing to compare yourself, and especially to compare yourself against somebody's highlight reel or something that they've been doing for a long time. Wanted to maybe ask you if you have a quick suggestion or something that maybe you could share with the listeners in regards to really focusing on what you're doing and what you're building, and also knowing that Rome wasn't created in 1 hour period. It was years and years and years.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question because I think where we really need to focus, just like you're saying, not focusing on the highlight reels of others, but focusing on what we're doing and really understand why we're doing it. That's one of the things I go through with all my clients. It's a strategy I learned from Dean Graziosi, call it 7 levels deep, and really digging into what your why is. Because even myself, the first time I went through it, you know, I always knew what my why was. I knew why I was doing things. And then when I went through this exercise, and basically to sum it up real quick, you say what your goal is and you ask yourself why, and you give that answer. Well, why? And you go that 7 times. And by the time you go through that 7 times, it really brings out why you're really wanting to achieve that goal. And the cool thing is, I've done that with my clients on, and obviously done it with myself. Well, I just did it again on the weekend, and things change. And it's really good to understand why you're doing something, because that's what's going to get you up in the morning. Because you're going to have bad days, you're going to have tough days that you don't want to do something, but when you really understand your why, that's going to push you through.
Hmm. You shared that with me, and I just absolutely love that. And it's the whole concept and idea. And I believe Simon Sinek made it quote unquote famous with his original book, Find Your Why. But when you talk about it and the way you just mentioned it, it's 7 levels deep. And I think it's just really interesting how important it is to just dive a little bit deeper in regards to not only just your why, but how you're doing something and the approach you're taking. I think there's a difference of 700 levels deep as opposed to seven, and I think there's obviously probably some magic to that and why and how. But I think it's just really interesting, and I appreciate you touching on that. Got to ask you, but if you had to define yourself and you could only pick one word, what word would you pick?
Father.
Now, obviously, I have to share, not with Into it, but we had such a funny conversation before we went live that I couldn't help but chuckle on that. So going into you and what you do really quick, wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just briefly telling our listeners about who you are behind the microphone today.
Absolutely. So I've been an entrepreneur most of my life. I graduated college with an entrepreneur major, got into banking and whatnot, rodeoed professionally for a number of years. But I've been a basketball coach for the last 20 plus years. Most of that has been in one form or another with my own children. I had the opportunity. I quit coaching the high school boys basketball when my daughter was in elementary, and then pretty much followed her up until she graduated high school. And you know, now I started a company in 2005, built that up as a manufacturing company, built that up, and unfortunately had to shut it down during COVID. And then for the past number of years, 3 years probably, I've been more focused on the coaching business. But the answer to my last question is because most of what I do, I try to focus it around my family, and I spend a lot of time trying to do the things that keep me tight with my children, with my wife. And I've got 4 kids. My oldest just got married. My next graduates in a couple weeks. Then I've got one in 8th grade, and then my youngest is a special one that we adopted when he was almost 2 years old from the Congo.
Yeah, you have such a interesting story of just who you are, but I love what you shared about coaching and especially with boys basketball, how you stopped when your daughter's younger because it does take away time. It's something that I speak about whenever I get an opportunity to speak in front of different people on different platforms, it's the idea of every time you say yes to something or someone, you are ultimately saying no to somebody else and something else. And I don't want to be, black and white and go into this, a million miles deep, but I think it's interesting. And for me, when I was coaching, my I was a head varsity basketball coach. My kids were very young, and although I loved it and I had a fantastic experience, I missed my kids and coming home really, right before they were going to bed and things. So I totally get that. Wanted to get your perspective on goals, and we haven't had this conversation, so I'm curious what you're going to say. But do you utilize goal setting, and if so, how do you use that personally, but also with your clients?
Absolutely. Great question, because that is something that's really important to me. And I could go on and on about this. Yes, I do. And yes, I do the same thing for myself as I do with my clients. I do have a process. Um, and if you don't mind me throwing it out there, at jeffhagee.com/momentum, I've got a free course for this purpose of setting goals and finding out your why behind every one of them, the 7 levels deep I was talking about. And that's actually the process I said I went through myself again this past weekend. And so I do set my goals and figure out the why behind each one. But I think some of the most important things I do with it is part of my morning rituals. So the first thing I do every single morning is I get up early. I'm an early riser, and I come in here to my office. First thing I do is I write out my goals. Second thing I do is I go through a process where I have what I call my mindset questions, where it's a list of questions that I just go through every day. And the reason for that is the same reason I write out my goals every day. If you know what your RAS, your reticular activating system is, it's the thing that when you buy a new shirt, all of a sudden you see everyone else wearing the same shirt. When you buy a new car, all of a sudden you see that car everywhere. Well, your RAS is a filter that brings you to the attention of things that are important to you, because there's so many things going on around us. We can't pay attention to everything. When you're going through these mindset questions, when you're writing out your goals every day, you're telling your RAS these are important to you, and it's going to help you to find the ways you're going to achieve those things.
So just a follow up question to that, in regards to you personally writing your goals, do you write them down in a sense of completed them as in a past tense? And also, when you're writing them down on a daily basis, are they long term goals? Are they life goals? Or are they more short term?
They are, most of them are about 1 year goals. They're sitting right here in front of me, and I am writing them as if it's done. And I'm looking at one, and it's a July 1st, 2022 goal. And, but all of them are as if these are things that I have accomplished.
And I think that's so important. And I'm actually reading a book right now by Brian Tracy, and he goes pretty deep into that aspect of writing them out, but also how you write them, not just saying, I'm great or I achieved this, dollar perspective. There's so much more into it. You shared, I believe, twice how this past weekend you went back and went through a process. Wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just expanding on that briefly, in the sense of why is it that you go through this a couple times and how often do you do it? And the reason I want to ask you that is I think one thing I've found from interviewing some just incredibly successful people such as yourself from all walks of life is it's not doing something once. Now it's not the flip side of doing it, every 2 hours, but I wanted to get you, if you wouldn't mind, just touching on why it is you do that, and also how often you do that.
Absolutely. How often I do it, it's usually probably about every 6 months that I really dive deep into it. In between times, there might be things that something happens that I need to tweak a goal or something, but about every 6 months at least, I want to sit down and really go through this process, the one that I have in my momentum series. And what it is simply is saying, okay, visualize yourself having the perfect year. Put yourself out a year from now, and it has been absolutely perfect. Now let's take a look back and what happened that made that perfect. What did you accomplish that made it perfect? And that's how I go about setting my goals. And so I look at, if I a year from now or a little more, like I said, I've got July 1st, 2022 as one of my goals. what happened between now and then that made that perfect, and that's how I set my goals. And then I go through the process of doing the 7 levels deep of figuring out the why behind each one. And I just think the reason I don't just do it and leave it for a year or 2 years or whatever is because circumstances do change. When I look at some of my financial goals, some of the things that I've done with courses and some of the things I teach have changed and created new opportunities and different avenues that I'm going to be focused on. And so I needed to change that. And that's why, like I say, the first one, the July 1st, 2022 one, that was specifically because of a new mastermind group that I'm putting together, that I wanted to have that established and set up for at least a year before I started looking at the numbers on that.
I appreciate you expanding on the how you did, and I think it's always for me so educational to just understand why people do certain things and how often they do it. And I think 6 months is really interesting. But I like how you touched upon the fact that this is something for July 2022 because we are in May of 2021 as we're recording this. So I think that's really cool how you touched on that. You and I have had some interesting conversations, and I mean interesting in a good way, about books. So I have to ask you if you're currently reading something, or perhaps you've read something recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually one that I just finished reading. It was a friend of mine actually suggested it to me, and it was called The Last Lecture. It's one to really look back and makes you reflect on your life. It was a professor that was dying of cancer with some young kids. It was a great book. But what I am reading right now is The Common Path to Uncommon Success by John Lee Dumas. And just started it, and so far, yeah, it's great.
The Last Lecture by Randy, I believe, Pausch, fantastic
Yes.
book. And I actually had the opportunity of being on and having JLD on my show. So I got an advanced copy of that book, and I devoured it in, I think, a day and a half, 2 days. And there was just so many takeaways for me. So I appreciate you sharing those two with us. If I had the opportunity to grant you dinner with any five people, dead or alive, and you could level up with them, who would you pick?
You know, I you know we've had this conversation, and this stressed me out because so before we got on the call, I started making my list, and I'm looking at it right here, and I got to 15 and thought I've got to stop right, and then I've got to narrow this down. So I narrowed it down to my five. Jenna Kutcher is one. Michael Jordan, Jesus, Tony Robbins, and Russell Brunson.
Who was the second guy? Michael, what was it? Jordan? Was he
Yeah,
famous for
he
something?
used to be a baseball player.
He that is factually 100% true. He did used to be a baseball player. Some people say he was horrific, which I've argued many, many times. Jenna Kutcher, I wanted you to expand on her because we have had a conversation offline and wanted to just ask you if you wouldn't mind just briefly telling our listeners a little bit about who she is and why you selected her, because she's someone, and I don't mean to say this in any disrespectful way, but with, like you said, there's so many things out there we can all see. I know for a fact she does amazing stuff, but she's not as famous as the other four people that you selected. So if you wouldn't mind just briefly telling our listeners a little about who she is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right. I mean, even looking at my list, there's the Oprahs, there's all those that you can look at that are so influential and impactful. But one thing about Jenna that I've really appreciated, one, she's brilliant. Um, but she was able to create something with with the talents that she had and the following she had. She started from completely different than what she's in now, but she got into podcasting and coaching, and the talents she has with working with her audience and creating has been something that I've really appreciated what she does. And, for example, with her social media, she has a thing, she calls it the JK5, on her whole philosophy around posting on social media or whatever. And it's something that I've actually just started implementing into my social media, where you pick the five things in your life that are important to you. and then you rotate through those things on your social media posts. So like for myself, I'm probably going to mess this up. I don't know if I have it memorized, but it's family, faith, mindset, entrepreneurship, and personal development. And so my posts are going to rotate around those things. And what that does is it also, someone that might be interested in the things I post about my family might not be interested in the mindset things I focus on. And so it kind of gives you an opportunity to hit all parts of your target audience. But I've just really liked what she's been able to quickly grow into, and the influence she's quickly developed, going from not having any stage really to perform on to now she's speaking with Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi and all them.
Yeah, I when you and I spoke about her, you shared that, and I think it's a really neat concept and idea or strategy as far as social media. And I tend to find that people have either no strategy or one specific strategy, and I don't think there's any quote unquote right way or wrong way to do it. But it's a really interesting strategy, and I really appreciate you touching on that. So we're going to switch over to our hot seat questions. And the only request we have of you is that you spit out the first thing that comes to mind, but make sure that they're the right answers, okay?
All right.
Last meal, you can pick absolutely anything. What do you pick?
Steak.
Favorite smell?
Coconut.
All-time favorite sport?
Basketball.
Do you have a favorite team?
The Bulls.
What is your favorite movie that whenever it's on, no matter what you're doing, you got to stop and at least watch a little bit of it?
Oh, I'm not a movie buff.
You're fired.
I know. The first one that comes to mind is Happy Gilmore.
Do you have an all-time favorite book?
Probably Think and Grow Rich.
What is the favorite app you have that you use on your phone?
Evernote.
What is the background picture on your phone?
Family.
Do you have an all-time favorite quote?
Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, he can achieve.
And what is that one song, no matter whenever you hear it, you always have to turn it up and just rock out?
California Lovin'.
that is not the song that I thought you were going to pick, which is really interesting because I've had some fun. This is a recent question we've added, and there have been a couple people that have not only hit me with something totally out of left field, but then they've hit me with, well, what did you expect I was going to say? And that's almost like a double-edged sword because I'm like, I'm not really sure, but not that. So Jenna doesn't count. You can't say Jenna. But I wanted to ask if there are maybe one or two people that you'd like to recommend that really put out positive and uplifting stuff or just really good content on social media.
You know what? Someone that I've been following more and more lately that I really like what he does is Jesse Itzler. And he's a pretty amazing guy. And, Russell Brunson's someone that I mentioned in my top 5, but there's so many. Ed Milet is someone that I love listening to him. Brendan Bouchard. There's just so many.
I love that. Those are 4 people that I follow as well, and I had the opportunity with one of my coaching programs that I am part of. Jesse was on twice. He spoke on our private group, and just an amazing guy. But what I love about Jesse is, and this is not meant to simplify him in any way at all, is some of the things that he practices and he preaches are so simple, but it's the consistency of how he does it. And it's about doing it every single day, not if and when you feel like it. And if the weather's nice, it's the stuff that he does all the time. And I know I've talked about this before on the show, but if you have not read Jesse's book, Living with the Seal, any listeners, if you do like either David Goggins or Jesse Itzler, it's a very quick read, but it just talks about the craziness, and I mean that in a good way, of not only David Goggins, but also the craziness of Jesse to have David Goggins live with him and his family for an entire month. Have you read that book?
I have, and yeah, that was my first introduction to Jesse, and I was like, this guy's nuts.
Yeah. I think there's a bunch of people that have said the most successful people from all walks of life. They have some type of nuttiness within them. Sometimes it's completely over the top. Sometimes it's just something that, they're just fanatical about doing this in a specific way. And I think when you get to peel back the layers a little bit and find out a little bit more, which the book Living with the Seal clearly does, I think it's just fantastic. What does the word accountability mean to you?
To me, it means that you do what you say. That when there's something that you've said that you're going to be able to do, that you're in charge of, that you're going to do it.
And I think too often than not, we say a bunch of things and the follow through is not as strong and powerful as the commitment to either yourself or somebody else. So
Absolutely.
What's the best way for our listeners to connect, follow you, but also please tell them a little bit about where they can also find your podcast as well.
For sure. Thank you. JeffHeggie.com, JeffHeggie.com is my website. You can see all my courses, everything on there. On Instagram, it's Jeff Heggie Coaching, and I'm on all the social media. As for the podcasts, I actually, as of this recording, today launched my third podcast, which 3 podcasts, I don't know what I'm getting myself into, but they're all available on Apple and wherever you find podcasts. The Jeff and Heidi Show, it's a podcast where we interview entrepreneurs and talk about their entrepreneurial journey. I have a daily podcast called Daily Success Strategies. That's usually a 5 to 10 minute podcast that I just talk about success strategies on a daily basis and things you can implement into your life. And the Jeff Heggie Show, which I launched with the Believe Network today, is similar to the Daily Success Strategies, but it's a weekly podcast and a little bit longer. And so I'm excited. All 3 are things that get me excited and I love doing.
Well, congratulations on the third. My challenge to you is by the time we speak next, I think you should have at least 4 or 5 podcasts. So I think you're slacking. And then the last question we have for you, Jeff, is the same question we ask everybody: is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
You know what? One of the things, in fact, the podcasts I launched today, what I talk about is your self-talk. And one of the things that I think is really important is to really take control of your own self-talk. And what I tell a lot of my clients is stop believing your own lies, because there's so many times we tell ourselves that we can't do something. Why would I be able to do that? Why should I have that opportunity? Why not? Start looking at it as they say, life's happening for you, not to you. So create that positive self-talk. I talked earlier about your RAS. Having a positive self-talk really impacts that, and it's going to help you achieve all the dreams that you have in life.
I absolutely love that. And I think there's so much power behind what you say to yourself. And I really appreciate you touching on that, expanding on that. And I thank you for jumping on our show. I'm sure you have about 48 other of your own shows to get to, but I know that you and I will connect again soon. And I just appreciate you jumping on here and sharing with us today.
Thank you. Always love chatting with you.
Thank you for listening to episode number 339. Jeff touched upon a bunch of topics that I really agree with. As my listeners know, 2 of my favorite topics are goals and morning routines. Perhaps it might be time to take a look at your morning routine and maybe begin writing down your goals. In Jeff's parting words, he mentioned the importance of our self-talk. With that in mind, I would like to challenge you to tighten up your own self-talk. We can't control what other people say or think, but we can control our self-talk. So as you get off this podcast today, focus on your own self-talk. Speak only positive words to yourself. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.